Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hello, and welcome to Champion Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming, presented by Codename Entertainment and TakeThis.org. Every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time here on twitch.tv/CNE Games, Mitra Jordan and Raffael Boccamazzo, aka Dr. B, talk about mental health and how gaming affects us. If you're this live in the chat, you can leave a question that I, Treavor Bettis, will ask them later in the show. Our topic today is about changing other people, or if we even can. But before we get to that, Mitra, Dr. B, who are you two for the fine folks who may not know?
Hi, I'm a registered clinical counselor working out of Victoria, British Columbia. I see all kinds of people, adults, teens, couples. I actually do a lot of marriage and family therapy, and I love games. And games somehow come up. Gee, I wonder why. No, it's always just my client's agenda. But I do like games, and so do some of my people. So there we go.
Well, I'm Raffael Boccamazzo, better known as Dr. B for long Italian name reasons. I am a clinical psychologist in Washington State. I'm the clinical director of the oldest mental health nonprofit to serve games, Take This. Make sure to go check out TakeThis.org. I'm an expert on the applied use of things like Dungeons and Dragons and other games in clinical and learning settings. And I love talking about games too. And I'm here to talk about, but I'm also here to mention, I don't know for those of you out there who have obtained your hoodies, but they are glorious.
Mm-hmm. Super comfy.
And
glorious.
Yeah, no, Bobby Roode intro glorious for you WWE fans. And thanks to Codename Entertainment's support, Take This was able to raise over $2,200 with these. So thank you to Codename. Thank you to everybody in the chat who got one of the hoodies or the t-shirts. It's awesome. I'm looking forward to lounging around in mine once it cools down a bit more in Seattle.
That was the funniest part where I'm like, yay, it's a sweater. Oh, it's a sweater. Oh.
But yeah, we're talking today about how do we make people change. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's because Mitra, I want to go full Harry Carey mode here. Hey, Mitra. When you're seeing a client,
yes, when I'm seeing them,
when you see clients, do you ever have someone ask, how do I make my significant other change? How do I make my child change? How do I make my partner change? How do I make my friend change? Because I know they need the help. How do I do it? Well, people, this is starting to sound like an infomercial now.
Go into therapy, set it, and forget it.
It's a strange thing when we care so much about people and we want them to change. Because we want them to feel happy. And it sucks to watch other people we care about suffer. And we are just sure we know what they need. And so we want to make them do it. But it doesn't work that way. No.
He said it.
At all.
You heard it here. Yep.
All right. Well, that was a great episode. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Yep. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. We'll be here next week.
Yep.
Okay. So we want people to change. And it's usually twofold. It's perhaps if it's someone we love, watching them suffer or struggle through something, and we feel like they don't have to do that. There's an easier path. I can see the path. I if you just did this, right? So the other reason is not just their suffering, but ours, because, we're in relationship with them. I had a supervisor who said people coming into marriage counseling, there's a dragee and a dragor. Now, this isn't always the case. Sometimes both parties decide, no, counseling would be helpful. But quite often,
Very often,
there's someone who really wants to come to counseling and also bring their partner along to counseling. That's the dragor, in case you're wondering. And then there's the person who's reluctantly showing up because I guess I have to.
Well, and I mean, I see that dynamic with teens a lot. Most of the teens are like, I'm fine, and then it's the parents who are like, often, not all the time, but frequently, change my child.
Yeah, and then I've had I have had people consult with me sometimes. Sometimes people I've not chosen to see actually as clients, because the consultation goes something like, I'm fine, it's my family. I need a family session or two to fix them. Now, sometimes I'll see people even if they're convinced that they're fine and it's their family, because they're still suffering, right? But there have been cases where it seems pretty clear that you're sure you're not the problem and I'm not going to be able to reach you, and sort of support the whole, because maybe you refuse to take any responsibility at all here, relationally speaking. So in any case, people want change. They often want to change other people. Sometimes they're willing to change themselves as well. Sometimes they're not really in touch with that. Sometimes they're not wanting to be part of the therapy, but they just want the other person to get help. What do we do?
Well, we force them to change, because forced change is always sustainable.
Absolutely.
Super
100%.
work.
When people change begrudgingly because we coerce them into it, that's healthy.
Famously the number one way to do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Dr. B definitely doesn't endorse in forcing people to change against their will.
Yeah, that's just a recipe for resentment and distancing in the relationship, and possibly even an emotional cutoff. And I think we've heard the sort of awful stories where parents have their difficult teens, carted off during the night to someplace or other, some kind of remedial boarding school situation. And, all that results in the end is usually trauma, abuse, and no relationship with the parents going forward. So if your hope is to change someone in order to have a better relationship with them, that's not the path. So
absolutely not. And no, Jen Lando, absolutely. I'm gonna hold fast. I will not be forced to change my opinion on forced change. No.
Okay.
No, I hear that. Okay, so it's a strange thing. I hear a similar thing when I give talks at conventions on the use of TTRPGs and other games in therapeutic settings, because one, people only they don't understand that I'm doing therapy. I'm not just playing games with people. I'm doing therapy first, and then I am I'm bringing in games as a delivery vehicle. So they ask at these conventions, how do I use TTRPGs to help my friends with their trauma? And my answer is, you don't.
Nope.
You don't, because digging into that stuff, that is therapy. And if you're not trained to do it, then you don't want to do it, because it's potentially harmful. And two, if you are a therapist, you're not your friend's therapist.
Yeah.
But you're also taking away consent.
Yeah.
People have to consent to changing their lives.
Yeah.
And that's often the most difficult thing for us to deal with when we care and we really want people to be happy, is dealing with our own discomfort at them finding their way slower than we want.
And change that is sustainable is always going to be slower than we want.
Yeah.
Because, we're used to sort of the montage, right?
Yes.
Training or otherwise, right? Which is it sort of really glosses over the actual painful aspects of change of
This
any
is how I
kind,
got through
right?
grad school, by the way. It didn't hurt at all.
No. Oh God, those years actually of grad school with 3 children under the age of 7 kind of felt weirdly like a montage. My life flashed before my eyes, but it was an extremely slow moving
Did,
montage.
did you ever have that nightmare of I need to turn in homework, but you were on break?
Oh God, yeah.
Oh,
Okay, yeah, you had
Absolutely.
that one too.
I'd
Sweet.
wake up, my heart racing, like absolutely.
3
Or
a.m. on a
the
Sunday morning, and you're just like, I got to get
yeah,
out the door, but wait, it's break.
yeah. Oh, or what about you've submitted your thesis, but then you're convinced you haven't, or you've
Yep,
submitted
did
your
that one too.
thesis and you're waiting for it to get back. You don't know how many changes you're going to need to make, and it's
You're
just
welcome, Jen
yeah.
Lando. You're welcome.
Oh God,
I've
yeah.
never been so
Sorry,
much
Jen
happier to have
Lando.
been
We get it.
a restaurant manager out of college.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
but sustainable change, there has to be, like Mitra was saying, there has to be investment.
Mm-hmm.
People have to be invested in order to change, in order for it to be sustainable, because they have, change is not like this linear, it's one and done. It kind of oscillates, and there's backsliding, but you go for an upward trend. And there's a lot of misconceptions about that on all parties, and it's uncomfortable for everybody, but especially if it's coerced.
yeah. I think one of the things that is really tough is say you're supporting someone on their change journey, and maybe you live with them, maybe you're a family member or roommate or close friend, and then you watch some of the backsliding,
Yep.
and it can be kind of terrifying, especially
Yep.
if it's something that's really bothered you. I mean, say it's a family member who's drinking, and they're choosing a harm reduction approach as opposed to AA, say. So they're trying to cut down, or they're occasionally having a drink. And, every single time you might see that, it's super activating, triggering for you
Yeah,
because it's gone wrong in the past. And so
sure.
it can also be really difficult if you're invested in someone's change to trust that the change is happening.
Yeah.
In fact, quite often those closest to a person are the last to really trust and recognize in the change, because they're the person who's perhaps, or the persons who've been impacted heavily from the perhaps destructive behavior
Mm-hmm.
or whatever challenges their friend or partner has had. So, yeah, so we have to be able to look at our investment in another person's change, and manage that, because it's really about them and their change.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the more invested we are in that, the more painful it is, and the more we may actually create problems for them to change.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Oh no, and our different expectations, that can be part of this, is when we have differing expectations of success. We've been public about it, so I don't mind mentioning this. But my significant other and I, so Jessica McCabe, How to ADHD, that's important for context here. We have talked about on one of her videos that I am the brakes, she is the accelerator. She and I view time so differently. Like, for me, if there's something, because, in any long-term relationship, there's adjustments that you need to make in your behavior in order to keep it successful. And like, if there's an adjustment I need to make in some of my behavior, my response is, it's been 2 days. And her response is, why is this so long and forever taking?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And our perceptions of things and our expectations and our experiences are just so different, and resolving those expectations can be a thing to navigate unto itself, like within any, interpersonal relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Please. You're the one who keeps us on track.
Well, I know we want to hit another point here in a little bit, but I am curious, just from an outside perspective on this, what do you all do in a session when someone says, how do I change them? Like, when they're just like, they think that you have the answer, that they can just take and go with them, and kind of telephone therapy to this person.
What do I do out loud, or what do I think?
What do you do out loud?
Sometimes there's the same thing, depending on how good of a relationship I have with them. I mean, if it's a really well-established client and we have a really good relationship, my response out loud is the same one as internally, and it's, "Oh, sweet summer child."
Yeah.
It's fair.
Yeah. I think that I'm sorry, Dr. B, did you have more to share about that?
Oh no,
I don't want to cut you off.
When I don't have as good of a relationship with them, we don't have this sort of rapport of humor built up. It's more of an exploration about why they want them to change.
Yeah.
And more often than not, it's because they want the best for the other person and they cannot tolerate their own sense of helplessness.
Yeah. And, I explore as well what the impact of that person's behavior is having on my client. So I try to center it on the client's experience, right? So how is this affecting you? How do you feel about it? What do you notice happening? Where's your activation coming up when you're dealing with them? And essentially, it's how do you take care of yourself?
Yeah.
And how do you set boundaries so that the effects of their behavior, aren't, affecting you as much? Because the other piece is, if we're wanting someone to change and they aren't, not only are we in touch with our own helplessness, but we're also in touch with a significant amount of frustration that tends to increase over time.
Oh, yeah.
Which is like, oh, this again, with that person. And that really undercuts our relationship with them. One of the best visits I had with my family was when I had just been in the midst of doing a lot of training in terms of somatic trauma training. And I was very well aware, really in touch in those moments with how activation works and what's happening with dysregulation with people, like how they're just feeling maybe upset or a little triggered or whatever it is that's coming up for them, right? And so I had this visit home, and it was just so much easier. It was so much easier because I was in a place where I had just been working on my own skills to stay really centered. And I just was able to take a step back and appreciate who they were. And as in their upset or whatever things were coming up, I was really able to kind of go, yeah, that's not about me. And so I was able to just recognize, yeah, I can't fix any of this. And this has been going on my whole life, really. These are kind of the long-term family patterns, right? They're here for a reason. I didn't create them, and I can't necessarily change them. What I can do is be present with them, really take pleasure in the moments that are going well, and kind of really be beside them in the moments that aren't, instead of trying to make it different. Just being present with them. And actually, one of the things that came out of that was somebody who had really been struggling a lot decided that they would then go for counseling. But it wasn't me saying anything. It was me being beside them, and they were much more able to hear themselves. And they also didn't feel like I was saying they had to change. Like sometimes if it's your agenda, then people push back defensively against that. But if you're just beside them, they can actually examine their own, what's happening for them, what they would like to change much more easily. So being a good friend is helping people, or a good partner is just really kind of trying to be beside the person as a friend. This is tough in relationship, though.
Yeah.
Let's be clear.
Well, and it sounds like what you're talking about, Mitra, is basically figuring out the limits of your role. Acting within that. Like, as a friend, obviously my behavior towards another person is going to be different than a sibling.
Yeah.
As a sibling, my behavior towards somebody is going to be different than that of a long-term monogamous romantic partner. As a long-term monogamous partner, my behavior is going to be different towards, let's say, a coworker or somebody who reports to me. And figuring out the limits of your role in each of those cases allows you to kind of stay within that and operate within how you think you should, instead of going over the line and acting like a therapist or doing something that's just, not really role appropriate. Like if I start assuming pseudo-therapeutic control over the people who report to me, that's not just unethical, that's potentially illegal and harmful.
Yeah. And if I start doing that with friends and family, I'm pretty soon not going to find them a safe space for me to
Right.
sink into, for me
Right.
to get support from. It has to be mutual. And so really, I think obviously it's a little bit more difficult when it's a long-term partner, when it's family you're living with, or when it's roommates that you're living with, when it's
Yeah.
work that you're going to every day, right?
Huh.
So the more contact we have and the less choice we have in that contact, the harder it can be. And the more significant the effect on our own lives, right? So the most important piece is to figure out where our own boundaries are, both in
Yeah.
terms of what can I actually do that would be useful? What am I prepared to do? And also, what's none of my business? And
Right.
what, in fact, is taking my energy and preventing me from maybe doing the things that could sustain me in this situation better,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, have you had the thing, and I think most mental health professionals I know have had this occur in their personal life multiple times, but I don't want to assume. So I'm asking if you've had this happen, where you have somebody who's maybe an acquaintance or even a good friend who just starts dumping on you, trauma dumping on you, because this is our profession. And so you can handle it, you can take it, and it's super uncomfortable. Ooh. And sometimes they don't respect the no. And even when, in most of the cases, my experience has been me saying, hey, this sounds like a lot that's going on for you, and it sounds really concerning. Can I offer you some resources for this? Because this sounds huge to you.
Yeah.
Most of the, and that, that's me setting my limits and my boundary, because I'm not working.
Yeah.
I'm not working at that time, and they're not my client. But occasionally it's been that no, I only trust you, and then that's a whole set of different problems. But yeah, just having that clarity and being able to set your own boundaries, like you say, of like, hey, this is what I'm willing to do. This is what I can do within the scope of that, because I need to be okay too.
Yeah.
100%. And I've certainly experienced it. But you know what? I think because I came to my profession as a therapist a little bit later, my first job was as a chef, and then years as a pastry chef. So actually, it was worse before I was a professional.
Really?
Because, well, from very early on, I fell in love with psychology and mental health. I read a lot of books. One of my very first jobs in Canada was being a nanny to two beautiful children whose mother was a psychiatrist, and she worked out of her basement and saw clients in private practice.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, I want to do that. I want to do that. But, I wasn't really ready to do that. And of course, it's years of training. And I was like 18 at this point. So, but I watched kind of how she sort of separated life and work, and how she had flexibility to do that, and kind of, to raise her family too. And I thought, this is perfect. This is ideal in so many ways. And it also suits me as a person. So for me, people would always come up to me and tell me stuff, like my friends, my family, everyone in my life would come up to me and tell me stuff. And I had no sense of boundaries around that, because I had no idea. At that age, you're clueless, right?
Yeah.
They're telling you stuff. On one hand, it's such an honor that people are talking to you, and it felt super good.
Uncomfortable
and at the
knowing
same
laugh.
time, oh yeah. And then so yeah, for me, my family used to jokingly call me Aunt Abby with all my friends.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I think that's not an uncommon story for either just people who are generally empathic and so on, and also people who are just really drawn to mental health. But so yeah, for me, the big shift came when I decided I needed to be able to lean on my friends. I needed that the relationship be mutual, and I started to just really kind of watch where friendships went and who I could also trust and sink into. And that kind of really helped. And so my feelers go up very quickly when people start to kind of talk at me about their stuff. And of course I'm empathic, but that's not I really draw the boundary between people whom I have a formal helping contract with, i.e. clients, and everybody else in my life, who I will listen. I've been a parent and a support to my friends' kids, like as, sort of helping them find therapists quite often has been a role I've had with them. And just sort of being the person who they're not uncomfortable to walk into the room with me after they've shared material. So I'm careful about what I let them share. So, but it's an ongoing process. And I think it's easy for all of us to fall into, hey, how wonderful it is that someone can trust and talk with you. But we also need to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, there's something we talked about yesterday in the pre-production, and there's this dynamic when we are the ones looking at things from the outside. It's kind of like being an armchair quarterback. It's on a Monday.
We just thrown that ball at the right time.
Yeah, no. If it be the day after, a Monday, when you're watching the football game on the television, that looks a lot different than being the person on the field.
Yeah.
When your adrenaline is going and your literal perspective is different than that top-down bird's eye view, almost that third-person perspective where you can see everybody on the field. And very often, we get caught up in our own arrogance when we want to change people and forget that they have a different perspective. When they're the player on the field, they don't see what we see in the stands. They can't do what we think they should do in retrospect, in the moment. We don't have the same pressures. We don't have the same we don't have the same consequences as they do. And so it's easy to say, I know what's best for you. But there are so many evils in the history of psychology and psychiatry that have been perpetrated by this paternalistic, I know what's best for you attitude. And that's something that I talk to people about frequently when they're like, I need so-and-so to change. I'm like, okay, why? Let's talk about this. Well, I know what's best for them. Well, no, you don't necessarily.
Exactly. And you can't always know what drives them to do the things that they do. Right. Even if you're really close to them, like you can be close to a person and not really aware of just how much anxiety they experience in a situation. Yep. And because, and that sometimes is because they aren't aware of how anxious they're getting.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like, it's a slowly heating up pot of water, if you will, right? So that it's like, and it's your reality that you've maybe had for a long time. So you don't always realize how bad it is or how tough it actually is for you to deal with. And this is where another person's feedback, gently offered, can be useful. But that's not change. That's observation. So your observations to those who are open to hearing them, who are in a place to hear them, that's different. And that's important. That's a role that we can have. I see this is really tough for you, or I see it's gotten harder for you to get out the door. What's happening for you? And, and then if they start to share, sounds like, what? Do you think you'd be open to talking with someone about this? Do you think you'd be open to maybe see your GP or your, but so we can be that support, but we can't be responsible and we can't push. Often for people contemplating to change, it'll take a few times.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you're also talking about a consensual symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
Where, going back to my sports ball analogy, this is, a coach obviously has a different perspective than a player on the field.
Yep.
And, a good coach is going to help that player get to where everybody thinks that everybody needs to be. And a good coach recognizes the player is the one making the decisions on the field. They still are responsible for their own decisions. And, it's the same thing with a movie director and an actor, at least in a healthy situation, where there's trust there in the director to see what the actor doesn't. And, similarly with a therapist or even just a good friend that we can lean on, maybe they see something that we don't, from a different perspective, and they can bring that to our awareness. But forcing someone to change based on just your perspective is so often disastrous.
Yeah, because the missing piece is being curious about what stands in the way for other people, right? So it's often difficult if I'm finding something particularly, quite easy. Like, I've always struggled with time, right? Yay, ADHD, thanks so much. And I've gotten a lot better over the years, but getting better over the years doesn't equal perfect.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that there are people for whom this isn't a struggle. They may have other struggles, but this isn't one of them. And for them to sort of say, well, I just don't understand why it's so hard for you.
Yeah.
Okay, are you interested in understanding why, or are you actually just critical? Right? And so if you're interested in understanding why, we can talk about it, and maybe you have some thoughts about what would be useful for me. Maybe I'm open to that, right? But if you just come across as critical, I'm going to stop listening.
Yeah.
Because I'm critical enough of myself.
Yeah.
Like, I find it's, you know what? If I'm running late for something, say I'm driving somewhere, trust me, the self-talk is not great.
Yeah.
We all have to work on that, So no, I don't need you kicking me when I'm already kicking myself, thanks.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the challenges, is we don't know another person's internal struggle. People usually know when others haven't responded positively to something, whether it's something they're doing or whether it's something they've witnessed that they also do and they haven't shared that they do this thing. But so we have a sense of how society
I shared that with you privately,
responds.
Mitra. I would thank you.
Calling you out because you're right here. Calling myself out. Like, yeah, because we're perfect. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention. So,
top of the show, we
thought
really
it
dropped
was
the ball on that
obvious.
one.
Thought it was obvious.
God.
Yeah. So, I mean, we all know what's ideal. Maybe everything isn't ideal to everyone, but we have a sense of, so when we don't do the right thing, like, if I happen to snap at my partner, it never happens. I'm an angel. If you're watching, Eric, I'm an angel. But no, if I happen to do those things, I know that's not a great thing to do. So, and it's great to have some positive feedback in the sense that, wow, that wasn't great. That's okay. But wow, you're just a jerk right? That's not super helpful. So just think about how you're offering support or observation or feedback to people, and bear in mind they need to change for them, not you. This is where
it
I
sounds
have
like
real
you're
trouble
talking
with
about
ultimatums.
curiosity versus criticism.
Definitely. Yeah. You mentioned that at one point with the good coach. I thought that was a
Coach A and Coach B.
I
would love to take credit for that. I heard that from Brendan Mahan of the ADHD Essentials podcast.
Nice.
The problem is no matter who's talking, if I'm talking to myself, no matter if I'm Coach A or Coach B, I'm always Coach B. So no matter what voice I'm using.
Yeah.
Just by default, just like every time I have an appointment, it's a doctor's appointment. Think about it.
God dang it.
Okay.
So okay, I will ask. So we've said recognize that we can't change people. So but we've said that there's these tools for doing it. How do we do it though? Like how do we do that encouraging thing?
Holding space.
Yeah.
Within the scope of what we can do for them, creating, this is something that therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists talk about all the time, creating essentially a safe container, a framework for them to be able to explore and live this sort of ambiguous, ambivalent existence, if that's where they're at. We give them the resources we can within the role that's appropriate. We listen insofar as we can within our limits, and we create that container for them. And we have patience for them to come to things kind of their own if we can. Sometimes we don't have that. Sometimes we don't have that. We have to decide our own limits, because behaviors affect us too. But yeah, basically it depends. There's so many layers to this.
There is, but let's be a little bit specific. Say it's your partner, okay? Say your partner needs to change their diet, right? Or they want to start eating healthier. You don't need to eat that pint of ice cream in front of them. You know, you don't need to have chocolate bars or cookies lying around the house. I'm not saying that you have to change everything about your diet, for example, but I think we can do things that are helpful to others. And you know, but what we need to do is elicit they can elicit our support. We can ask them what would be useful.
Yeah.
What's helpful? How can we support them?
Yep.
And then we can do that.
Yep.
You know,
if we can do that.
If we can do that. And if we can't, how can we be us in a way that doesn't interfere or make things worse for them? So I do think, you know, if you're invested in your partner's change for their own health and they're invested in their change, then you step it up, right? Your partner can't drink. Okay. Do you have to have alcohol in the house? Really? Right? And is it possible to just enjoy a drink when you're not in their presence? Or if they're explicitly okay with it, what are the constraints? Right? Because you may have asked your partner or really pushed to support that change. Be careful how much you push. We've talked about this, but say it's like really important to you too, then show up.
Yep.
That's really important.
The question, and Mitra's touching on this. One of the questions I frequently ask of people is, what is it that you're looking for from me right now? And maybe this is just autistic brain being direct, but I'm just like, hey, you're my friend, you're my, you know, I want to be as supportive as I can. What are you looking for right now? Are you looking for empathy? Are you looking for solutions? Are you looking for validation? Are you looking for resources? And then based on their response, I can decide at that point, what do I have available to offer them? And then we can hopefully meet in the middle. Basically, it's like somebody saying, hey, can I borrow some money? And I'm like, I got $20 on me. And they're like, I need 100. And I'm like, I got 20. And I can give you 20. But if they come back at me and they're repeatedly like, but I need 100, and I'm like, I don't have that.
Yep. And you have to think about what you can tolerate.
Right.
What's going to work for you. So, because change has to be sustainable for the person changing, but it also has to be sustainable in some ways for the person around them. Right. So there's some give and take, especially if it's someone we're living with. And if it's someone we're visiting with, then, you know, then for one evening, for instance, I make a bunch of really nice non-alcoholic cocktails or something, right? You know what? I'm not living with the person, but I'm there for them. They eat vegetarian, I'll cook vegetarian. You know, they need this or that, I'll do it. If I'm living with them, I have to think about how's that going to be sustainable for me? But how's my behavior also not going to interfere with their change process? Because that's really important. It's a really vulnerable time when we're trying to put new habits in place, right? So,
well, and you're bringing something up, Mitra, that this is a vulnerable, and this is these are stressful conversations often to have with people, and especially if we're concerned about somebody's behavior, and they don't necessarily, it's not in their awareness yet. You know, people said, how do I bring this up? How do I bring this up without it being uncomfortable for me? And I'm like, if I had an answer for that, I would love to give it to you. Because these are sometimes uncomfortable conversations. You know, when my clients have been concerned about family members or behavior of somebody around them, one of the things we've talked about is discussing only behaviors and the effects.
Yeah.
In a non-judgmental way, which is super freaking hard.
It is, because by the time you're discussing it, you've built up a level of frustration, resentment,
Yeah.
sadness, abandonment, betrayal, all
Yeah.
kinds of things. Yeah.
What's been helpful for a lot of them is actually I used to work on what was called therapeutic community. It was a peer support community. It was a transitional living unit, and the guys on that unit actually had a script, and they needed to follow when discussing change behaviors with each other. And one of them has just become ridiculously useful for me since then. And it's, hey, out of care and concern, I would like to bring something to your attention. And I've noticed that if we go with the alcohol example, I've noticed that when we go out with friends, you drink so much that in some cases you fall down, or you tell me the next day that you embarrassed yourself. And then it's pure cause and effect in behaviors, no judgment. But it's so hard to do. I don't recommend anybody just start doing that with their friends and family. This is something I support people through. If this is something you're struggling with, how do I help a loved one or something, consider talking to a therapist.
Yeah.
Definitely useful to be able to talk to someone who you can also unload some of that frustration and just get familiar with all of the feelings it leaves you with, because it's really tough to encourage change when there's a piece of you that's feeling resentful or punishing or hurt or betrayed, right? So there needs to be a container for those emotions too, so that you are actually able to say things that are going to help promote that change instead of undermining your own message. So
yeah, it's walking that line of being support. And for those of you who have read, classic Western works, the metaphor I often use is being the Virgil to their Dante, of being beside them instead of doing things for them, of showing them what you see and creating the space for them to decide how they want to act. That's often how I see my role as a therapist. That's, to a certain extent, that's how I see my role as a friend, to be supportive of my friends insofar as I can. And support sometimes means bringing uncomfortable things to the situation because there's a respect and a mutual idea that we want what's best for each other. But that's, again, the support and the relationship has to be there.
Yeah. And I think as well, we need to consider our own sustainable relationship with that person, right? So if we're with them, day in, day out, say, if it's our partner, for example, we have to think about how much energy this is taking for us. So at some point, sometimes we'll need to pull back and take care of ourselves in order to continue to be there. So when you're beside someone in their process, also think about how you're going to rest and take a break from it. And how much you're getting invested in whether they change or not, and how that's affecting your relationship, right? So, yeah. The other piece, so sorry.
No, please.
I was going to say the other piece that I think is important that people don't always think about is, say we're in a relationship and we want our partner to change. Our own changes, our own habits, our own the way we start to talk about this, or the way we can be more compassionate, actually contributes to their change. And also our positive
almost like environment has an effect.
Yeah. So if we change us, we often do also change them. If I start to eat healthier, I start to cook healthier, those are the meals my partner's eating then. If I decide that I want to get exercise and maybe my partner sees I feel better, they might be encouraged to try it too, but I can't be bound up in that, right? Because they might not. So that's me then thinking about my own health choices. And it's great if the other person sees them and decides that's exciting to them too, or they want to give it a go.
Yeah.
But you have to be clear about your reasons for your own change.
Yeah. Well, and again, this also comes back to deciding what our limits are. Just because somebody, this is often a misunderstanding when we talk, at least when I talk to people about creating a sort of holding space in a container, is misunderstanding that as being permissive.
Mm-hmm.
And just because, you know, we're creating a safe space for somebody to talk or explore doesn't mean we give up our own limits, because that does nobody any good anyway, at all. You are allowed to have limits as well, and you are allowed to decide what is too much for you and what you can remain in a relationship for. Whether that's a friendship, employment situation, a romantic relationship, you are allowed, you have needs too, and they are just as valid.
Mm-hmm. So how is this different from an ultimatum? Because I feel like that's often part of people's change conversations, and we didn't really talk about it in our pre-production, but
yeah, I mean, sometimes it can be an ultimatum, but you know, for me, if an ultimatum comes out of the blue, that's kind of like a step going from pacifism to nuclear arsenal.
Totally.
Well, I also think about, like, for anybody at work who's ever been in a situation where they've either had to give an employee a performance improvement plan, or they maybe have gotten one themselves. It's my belief that performance improvement plans should not be unexpected.
Yeah.
Ultimatums should not be unexpected either.
Exactly.
They shouldn't come out of the blue. There should be a clear pattern of dissatisfaction and so forth, and problems that haven't been resolved, and attempts to resolve those things. And that's the difference between, I think that's the difference, Mitra, between support and an ultimatum. Though I could argue that an ultimatum could be supportive. But how can I help versus I'm at the end of my patience and this needs to change, or I have to make a change.
Yeah.
Those are different.
So I think there's a difference between the feeling that sometimes can come with an ultimatum where your partner is now holding you hostage to something, right? That sense. Versus,
and it can feel that way.
It can feel that way. But it's also, it should more significantly be, for the person giving the ultimatum, a boundary to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do more than I've done, and if this doesn't change, I can't sustain being here. I can't sustain it. I can't tolerate it. Mm-hmm. And that's about me. That's not about you. And I think that's really, that's an important piece of it. So if you're doing that, don't brush past your own ultimatum and go, well, I guess it won't change. I'm still here. Take yourself and your needs and your level of tolerance seriously. Have a thought, an idea, a plan for what comes next if this doesn't work. Because to trample past your own capacities is to diminish your own health.
Yeah, no, this is one of the biggest things I can say to folks is, as you're navigating other people's needs, remember that you have them as well. And if they make choices not to change, you are also allowed to make choices.
Yeah.
So that is like that's always a difficult situation to be in, especially if we're talking about some sort of relationship where, where somebody is making choices that just deeply affect you in a negative manner. Mm-hmm. Right. And how do you navigate that?
Right. Because we've talked about habits in terms of change, but the other piece can be acceptance in terms of change, which is to say, if you say this is Pride Month. So if, for instance, you're part of the Pride community one way or another, right? Mm-hmm. But you've got a family member who's not accepting, right? That might be something where you decide, okay, I can talk to them. I can see if we can get some change going, but maybe we can't. Maybe this is how they're going to see the world. We're very different here. So do we cut off? Do we minimize contact? Like, what are our choices, right? Because those, people's misogyny or bigotry or hate or whatever it is that we're experiencing from them because we live differently than they do, that's something we cope with as well.
Absolutely.
That's something that maybe isn't changeable.
Well, and it's not just, it's not, although that's a common situation, it's not limited to that. It's this is something that folks with various medical and psychological needs face as well. I've cut off family members who have not been able to acknowledge my needs being autistic, or have even gone so far as to say, I just need to buck up. And they are welcome to live their lives. I'm just not going to be near them as they do. And it's deeply painful because there's this expectation of what I want to see versus the reality. And that often in the tension and that dynamic of interpersonal change, or that interpersonal dynamic about change, that's often where some of that tension is, that the expectation and the hope versus the reality. What I want to be versus what is.
Well, we have to start wrapping things up. Feels like we're talking a little down there at the end, but sometimes we just gotta wrap up at those points of time. I did see that there was a question that came through, and just as a heads up, we are going to do another questions that we missed through the season episode towards the end of this one, so we'll be sure to get that one in there. But yeah, where can people find the two of you on the interwebs if they'd like to do so?
So I'm at Mitra Jordan on Twitter, and mitrajordan.com is my website where the contact information if you should wish. And that's it for me, whereas this guy, as we like to say, he's around.
I'm around, yeah. God, and I've got that's a line from Archer that Krieger says, and I just realized I've got the Krieger hair going right now. Oh my God. Where do you find him? I'm around.
Trevor's hair is spoofy.
you can find me at the Dr. B on all the socials. But more importantly, follow TakeThis.org. That's really the important account to follow. So that's me. Go follow Take This. That's more important.
All right. As a heads up, what is it? New Game Plus that comes after this? Yeah. Sean's show after this one is going to be postponed this week, but Sean will be back later in the week with more shows because he does a lot of shows. But that is going to do it for this week's episode of Champion Psychology. So until next week, take care of yourself.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.